Hello Isopod fans, this is Wally Kern with Supreme Gecko, Supreme Isopods. I've been going on Facebook groups and I've seen tons and tons of posts where people are losing their isopods after maintaining them for months and months. And that's a shame. I feel really bad about that. Well, today we're going to talk about what I feel is the number one issue with people losing their isopods after maintaining them for a long time. Let's get into this. Hey, have you been watching our videos for a long time and appreciate the content that we're putting out there? Well, if you do, hit that like button, hit the subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell all so you don't miss another one of these videos. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So what in the world is going on here? I have 8 bins ready for isopods. Now, these aren't new isopods. These are established isopods that need a new home, a new enclosure, and today we're going to set them up. I'm going to show you a little bit. We're not going to do all 8, but we're going to show you one isopod bin and how it's set up, and then I'm going to talk about that. One reason I feel people lose their isopods, maybe you're losing your isopods, but when people lose their isopods after 6 or 8, 10 months, this is what I think is the number one reason. So let's get into setting up one of these isopod bins. What I've already done is mixed up the substrate for all of these bins. The substrate is about 1.5 inches to 2 inches deep. It's made up of compost, worm castings, dirt. It's made up of Zilla's Jungle Mix. It's made up of wood pellets as well. It's a really good mix here. So all the substrates are all set for all 8 of these containers. All I need to do now is add some leaves. Add some, this is heavy. Add some sphagnum moss. I've pre-wetted this, so this is heavy. And we're going to add some wood. All set with some really nice wood pieces. But there's going to be a key here that you really have to understand when you're setting up an existing enclosure. When you're transferring isopods from an existing enclosure into a new enclosure. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So let's take a look at the 8 containers that we're going to move over. These are 8 isopods that I've had established for quite some time. First one here is Porcellio scaber orange koi. The next one is Armadillidium vulgare magic potion. The next one is Cubaris murina. The next one over is Porcellio species Valencia. Next one over is Armadillidium vulgare punta cana. This one is Armadillidium depressum. The next one over is Armadillidium marmalized. And finally we have Armadillidium versicolor. All of these cultures are really taking off and I need to move them into bigger enclosures. And again, let me stress, these are all established cultures that need to be moved over because they're overcrowding their enclosure right now. I'm going to go ahead and mention one more time, this video is not about what happens with your culture if it dies off within the first couple of weeks, first month or so. It's more about what happens with your culture after 6 to 8 to 10 months. If you're losing your isopods after the first few weeks, there's other reasons for that, like maybe too much or too little ventilation or humidity or temperature, or it's an older culture. There's a lot of other different reasons, and a couple of other YouTubers have already put out videos on what those reasons could be. This is if your cultures are dying after a longer period of time, like 6 to 8 to 10 months. Let's go ahead and set up one of these enclosures. The first tub we're going to tackle is Armadillidium versicolor, one of my favorite isopods. I love their colors. Let's move some stuff around here. And let's start on the versicolors. We have our small bin, move that to the side. Lots of ventilation. We have a couple of holes on the sides and we have the top that has a couple of big holes as well. Again, this substrate was pre-mixed, so we're all set to go. Let me go ahead and grab some versicolors here. I'm going to go ahead and transfer the wood. And this is a really, really key point here, and I'm going to tell you more about this in a second. I'm going to grab all of the leaves and a little bit of sphagnum moss here. That's not really important that they've eaten most of those leaves. Grab the other piece of wood. And here's another key point. I'm going to grab all the sphagnum moss that I can. The sphagnum moss is still okay. I'll probably put a little bit more sphagnum moss in this container. Let's go ahead and do that right now, just to even it out just a little bit. This will be a really nice moist area right there. Okay, we're down to the tough point here. The tough part is getting these isopods over into the new mix, into the new enclosure, without hurting them, of course, but not taking all of that substrate over with us. Let me grab one more scoop here. I'll put it over here. Okay, we're doing really well here. I'm going to grab one more scoop. The important point is I'm not going to take all of the old substrate out of the container, the old container, and put it in the new container. What I'm going to do is seed this new enclosure. That is so important. If you know anything about fish at all, aquarium keeping, you know that a tank has to cycle before you add a lot of different fish in it. That's really important because it establishes the bacteria levels, it establishes the anaerobic, aerobic bacterias, and it really sets up the enclosure to handle the load in that enclosure for the fish. It's the same exact thing for isopods. Here we're seeding the new enclosure with all of this older substrate, which is already bioactive. We have all kinds of good stuff in this old substrate, springtails and all kinds of other microorganisms. This is exactly what we need to do to establish that cycle. The biggest problem, and here's the key to this whole presentation, the biggest problem is after a few months, after several months, 6 to 8 to 10 months, a smaller enclosure, like we're keeping these isopods in captivity, builds up a lot of waste in this substrate. As well, just think about all of that waste material and all of the animals in there. That's a huge load on these small enclosures, and the ammonia levels, everything builds up to the point where these animals can't take it anymore. So what usually happens is you have an enclosure like this, the animals maintain for a couple of months, then they just explode, lots and lots and lots of babies. And you see this issue so much with dairy cows or other animals, other isopods that populate so quickly, breed so quickly, and these enclosures just can't handle that load. So give it a few more months. Now we're into the 6, 7, 8 month time period, and this culture crashes because these enclosures can't handle that load. Have you ever seen this happen with your culture? Have you ever seen it on Facebook where somebody will open up their enclosure and they have a few animals dead, the next day all of them are dead? It's very, very sad to read that or hear about that, but hopefully this tip will help you. What you want to do is move them over to a new enclosure after 6, 8, 10 months, but also very important, establish that culture, that new enclosure with substrate from the old enclosure. So I get this question all the time in messages and on YouTube, on Facebook. How do you transfer over these isopods? Well, after this initial seeding with all of as many of the isopods as I can get over there, now it's just a matter of moving them individually over. There's one, there's two, there's 3, there's 4. This is a long, long, tedious process. The best thing that you can absolutely do is keep the old enclosure, put food down, let them accumulate on the food after about an hour or so. Pick the food up, bring it over to the new enclosure, and just brush that food off, and all the isopods will transfer over, obviously. The other option is put another piece of wood in the old enclosure, let that sit overnight, bring it over, and gently brush off the isopods into the new enclosure. So we'll do that with our culture, this old culture. We'll put a piece of wood down, we'll put the food down. We'll move over probably in the next week or so as many isopods as I possibly can. And then I'm just going to have to throw a ball game on and sit and watch the ball game and move them over one at a time. I know it sounds tedious, but that's about the best way you can move these isopods over. But try the wood trick and the food trick, and that should help a lot. Okay, let's go ahead and finish off this Versacolor container. I'm going to go ahead and add some leaves, as obviously they don't have enough leaves in here. And you know me, I hate these stems. I hate the stems. And I think the reason I hate these stems is because I think from an older video that I saw from my good friend Russ at Aquarimax Pets, he had put the top on and one of the stems was overlapping the side of the enclosure and some isopods got out, and that just really, that point stuck with me so much. So I've got to take all these stems off and we'll put in a few more leaves here. There we go. And I'm going to see if I can put another piece of wood in here as well, because these pieces are really kind of small. Here's a really important point about this wood, and I'm going to turn the tub so we can see this a little bit better. As you can see, this is a pretty big piece of wood. It's concaved, which means that the isopods can get up and under it without being exposed to the substrate below. But really super important is the fact that they can use this wood as a bridge to go from the moist area all the way to the dry area and back and forth. And that helps them regulate their humidity, their moisture requirements. It's just a great way to let them do what they want to do. Well, the Versacolors are done. That's 1 out of 8, 7 more to do. Let me go ahead and finish off those 7 and I'll be right back. Fine. Hey Isopod fans, thanks again for watching this video. I hope you gained some information from this. I hope that this helps you with your isopods. Again, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. We'll see you next week.